I grew up in a Christian household. We always went to Sunday school. My siblings grew up and became my Sunday school teachers. And then going farther back, when I was really young, when I was still in my mom's belly, she said she could remember every time that we walked into church, I would start kicking and dancing, and I just loved it. And then when I was, I don't know, maybe 4, she tells me this story about how I was in the bathtub and we had these crayons that we could draw on the bathtub with, and she said that she drew a heart and she wanted to teach me some anatomy, and so she split the heart in half and said there's in quarters, and said there's 4 parts of a heart. And I said, yeah, Mom, that makes a cross because Jesus lives in there. And then when I was, I don't know, maybe 8, yeah, my younger brother and I, we would write these notes, and we have this little pouch that had an angel on it, and we would write notes like on Christmas Eve and say, "Happy birthday, Jesus," and we'd put them in this bag and we'd put them on top of my closet, and then somewhere high, and then we wrote notes throughout the year that said like, "God, we love you," and we'd fold them up, same thing, and put them in the pouch and then put it on the top of my closet. And I still have that little pouch with these notes. And so growing up, I always had a close relationship with God. And now I feel that same closeness, but there was a time where I just didn't feel as close. It was towards the end of high school and into college where something just wasn't clicking for me with this whole Christianity thing. Something just wasn't right with me, or with the religion for me. And so as I went to college, it was a really neat experience because for the first time I got to explore what that was. And so we had a campus Christian union, and it met weekly and had groups, and they talked about sin a lot. And they said, especially as college students, it's important for us to die to our sins so that we can live with God. And it felt very, I don't know, something about it felt accusatory to me. Like something was wrong with me. And so I stopped going for a little bit. I just felt like going there made me feel bad and not good. So I started to meet with the leader of the campus Christian Union, and so we went through these Bible studies because I wanted to stay connected to God and to stay connected in my faith. And so we did these studies to strengthen our faith, and we studied topics like how do we build our faith? We studied certain scriptures, and eventually we got to sin again. And this time she told me something that sparked me. And she said that sin means missing the mark. And so the definition of sin means missing the mark. And so for the first time for me, sin wasn't just this word that was used by Christians that I had seen to oppress people or to condemn people, but sin had a definition. And so this sparked me and excited me because that meant I could study it and I could try and understand it and unpack it and try to feel the love in it. And so as I studied sin, it took me back to Genesis. In chapter 3 in Genesis, beginning in verse 8, it says that the evening breeze, the cool evening breeze, blew through the garden, and God walked through, and God called out to the people, "Where are you?" And then the people hid from God. And so the people said, "God, we heard your voice and we hid because we were afraid, because we're naked." And I can just imagine what God must have felt in this story. That God must have felt so hurt that the people that God created to love, to be in community with, to be in relationship with, hid from God. For the first time in the story, for the first time in our creation, sin enters the story. But what is this sin? What happened? So when I look at it, I see people hiding from God. And why were they hiding? Because they were naked, they said. We were naked and we were afraid. For the first time ever in human history, in this story, shame enters the story. And when the people feel shame, they distance themselves from God and they hide from God. So when I look at this story, I see that shame keeps people from God. And when I look at my own story, I see that when I felt shame, when others were telling me to feel shame, that I distanced myself from God because I didn't want God to see this naked, ashamed me. Now, I feel like maybe this is true for other people, or maybe it's just me, but when I feel ashamed, I don't want God to know. Which is funny because, of course, God already knows, but it's like I'm trying to hide that nakedness, that those things that I don't want God to know because I've been told that they're sinful. And so if sin is missing the mark, my next question was, what is the mark? And so from this study so far, from study 1, we said that God is love. And we read that from 1 John 4:16 that says exactly that, God is love. And then study 2, we said, why should we love? And we said, well, Jesus commands us. In John chapters 13 and 15, and in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus commands us to love. And in Romans 13:10, we read that love is the fulfillment of the law. And so to me, it seems like the mark of being a Christian, the mark of being made in that image of God, is love. If we're created in the image of God and God is love, then we were created to be love for the world. And that's pretty radical to me. I don't think I've ever heard that before. So if God is love and we are created to be love, then the mark is love. The mark of a Christian, of a Christ follower, is love. So missing the mark then, sinning, to me, would be not loving. Because if our goal is to be love, the only way that we cannot do that is to not love, is to condemn and oppress people, is to tell people that they're unlovable. You know, and this reminds me of Jesus' own mother. You know, the Virgin Mary. And as we talk about her in her day, she was a young, unmarried teen who was pregnant. Talk about in that time what they viewed as sins. That was the biggest one. Like, check that off the list. Top sins, Mary. Woo. And yet that was the mother of God in the flesh. And so the religious people and the society at that time wrote Mary off. They said, nah, she's pregnant, she's unmarried, she must be a sinner. She's not following the ways of God. And yet they didn't see what God was doing in her or through her. You know, through Mary came Jesus, came reconciliation, came salvation through this unmarried pregnant teen. And the society had written her off as sinful and unworthy of love, and yet God had valued her, and God was doing something through her. And so when we call someone sinful or call something in our lives sinful or feel sinful, we have to go back to our personal relationship with God, or their personal relationship with God. Because if we look at our own lives and we say, this is keeping me from my relationship with God, then yes, maybe that is something that's keeping you from loving God and loving other people. And so everything is personal, in my view, that we can't condemn one thing or one idea or one type of person as sinful. Because in fact, if we do that, we are sinning. If sinning is not loving, to tell people that they are unlovable is sinning. And so as Christians, our goal as followers of Christ is to be people who do what Christ commanded, which is to love all people. And what distances people from God? Shame. And so when we go around casting shame or ourselves feeling shame, it keeps us from God. So to be better followers of Jesus and to have better relationships with God, we have to confront our shame. So think about what makes you feel shame. What keeps you from God? When do you not love others? And so as we explore together why we believe what we believe, it's my hope that we'll look at everything that we'll believe and ask why we've come to think that. Is it something that we found ourselves through Scripture, or something we've been told through the church or through Christians in the past? Is it just a part of culture, or is it actually something that we can find in the sayings of Jesus or in our Bible? And how do we interpret that as well? And so as we go through this study and we ask, how do we realign what we have as Christianity today back with the roots of love, the roots with the sayings of Jesus and with the first followers? It has to be personal. And so my hope isn't to tell you what to believe, but how to question what we believe so that your faith and my faith can be more personal, that it's not something that someone else has told us to believe, but it's something that we found true for ourselves. And so as we go through this study, my hope is that you will take terms like sin and start to question them and wonder about them. And so from this study, my hope is that you've seen that Jesus commands us to love, that God is love and we are created in the image of love. And so for me to sin is to not love. And so my hope would be that we would each recognize the places where we haven't loved. This has caused me to be more introspective and to reflect on my life and to say, where have I not loved? Where have I sinned, if that's my definition of sin? And so if we all look at our lives and question how can we be better followers of Jesus, I think that can change the world. Because as we go through life, if we live the commands of Jesus, and if we go back to Genesis and look at places where we feel shame and question what separates me, what separates you from God, when we look at that, when we breathe love into that, we reconcile that relationship so we can have that close relationship. When we find our shame, we can deal with it and we can love through it. And so my other challenge for us as Christians today would be to find people who the church or other Christians have said are sinful. And how can we be Jesus to them? How can we love them? Because that's the command of Jesus. And I believe that when we do this, when we actively live like Jesus, we will transform the world through love. When the kingdom comes down to earth, will you have been a part of it? Will you have been a part of what God is doing here?